everyone, welcome to this episode of Sulavon SheShed. I'm your host Sulavon, and today in the SheShed we have a really amazing guest. His name is Dr. Richard Koenigsberg. He is the curator and author of the Library of Social Science. So let's pop into the SheShed and learn more about Dr. Koenigsberg's journey. Today we have a really amazing guest. He is Dr. Richard Koenigsberg, and he's going to share about his journey in psychology and sociology, as well as what he has been working on for the last 40 years. Richard, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate being here.
So Richard, how did you get your start in your industry?
I got a PhD many years ago, and I was a college teacher, and I taught for 4 years. And then I became very fascinated with trying to study culture from a psychological point of view. I studied with a fellow called Norman Brown, who's considered one of the great scholars of the 20th century. He wrote a book called Life Against Death, The Psychoanalytic Meaning of History. And I started studying culture and history from a psychoanalytic point of view. And I got a PhD in social psychology because there was no PhD in psychoanalysis and culture. And I was trained in very rigorous experimental method. I taught for 4 years, and then I decided I didn't belong in a psychology department. I was assistant professor of behavioral science, and I went out on my own. I worked in market research for 3 years, so I do know a little bit about marketing. I worked for Ogilvy and Mather, the advertising agency, Octavia Smith. So I learned how Americans sell products, Then I tried to find a publisher for the book Hitler's Ideology, and I couldn't. So in those days, there was no word processors, but there was an IBM Composer. It was known as a strike-on typewriter. It was a very sophisticated typewriter. And one lady let me use her graphic design firm in the middle of the night when she wasn't working. I typeset my own book, sent it to a printer, and then it was delivered to my apartment on 16 West 95th Street. So I had 1,000 books in my apartment. And that's how my company started. And I had to figure out a way to get them out of my apartment because they were falling down on top of me. That's the beginning.
Is that what inspired the Library of Social Sciences? Like, did you segue into that from there, or was that a little bit later down the road? Like, was that in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s? So I'm just trying to get an idea of the timeline.
Yeah, I don't like to tell the girls how old I am. You never can tell what beauties are out there, even though I'm married. The Library of Social Science was the name of my publishing company. And I did that for like 10, 12 years. Then somebody picked up on my writing. Okay, somebody in Israel read one of my books, and he invited me to participate in a conference. This was 1988 at the International Society of Political Psychology. And they put me on a panel with somebody who was nominated for a Nobel Prize. So I was at the top in some way immediately. And that I did a little book exhibit, 2 tables, and my wife and I sold books. And it was thrilling because I hadn't talked to anybody in my field for 12 years. And then somebody suggested, why don't you make a business out of this? And to make a very long story short, I developed a book exhibit company to support my scholarship. So I didn't make any money from the academic world. I didn't make any money from my writing. I gave a lot of lectures. Eventually I got some keynote addresses. I might get paid $500,000. But basically, I had a real business, which was marketing books at conferences. So my customers were publishers. I got to meet nearly every important academic in anthropology, psychology, history. People think I'm exaggerating, but I did about 100 conferences, and they all come over to the book table. So they had to rap with me, even though I was not full professor at Harvard. They had to rap with me. And they saw I knew what I was talking about. So though that was my reintroduction to civilization, you might say, to a normal world.
Would you say it's harder to market to that demographic? Because usually academics are very specific about what they're choosing, but you already knew exactly what you were doing, what you wanted. So
Very good point. That was what
Mhm.
AI was responsible for. For any given conference, we'd have to find books on that topic.
Mhm.
So, if we were doing a conference on the Holocaust, we'd have to look up, research all the books on the Holocaust. Then we contact the publishers who had books, and we'd say, your author is presenting at the meeting. We would like to have his book at the conference. So we had a very sophisticated blackmail campaign because they don't pay these great professors to write these books, or barely. And if they're not willing to invest $75 to have their book presented, what kind of a publisher are they?
That's very true. And I think anyone that's watching this that wants to go into that specific field or in that demographic or basically honing in on that demographic, you should really listen to what Richard is saying. That makes a lot of sense.
But now there's no more conferences. So
That's
my
true.
conference life was ending at the same time it was winding down in my own psyche. But still, yes, book marketing, as you just said, in the scholarly world has to be targeted to a particular audience. So, that's what I did. And I had all kind of conferences, and I didn't go outside my domain. I mean, I was very, very focused on not just making money, but just in social science. Occasionally, we did one on the agricultural economics or something, because it was a big meeting, and we get books from Indonesia and stuff. Maya was a very great marketing. She'd say, "Oh, you have this book on farming in Indonesia. This will be really hot with the people in the agricultural meeting." And then they would send the book. They probably didn't get any calls for it in 5 years, and they were probably sleeping. And suddenly Mayha calls them and says, "Hey, we need your title at this meeting." So she was a very good salesperson. And I had a couple of people here working with me in my apartment, a large apartment on the Upper West Side. No, now I'm not in the Upper West Side. I moved from the Upper West Side to Elmhurst, New York, which is Queens. And the apartment here would be worth $3 million in Manhattan. And
That's true.
And I don't like Queens, but as I say, here's the way I communicate now. This is thrilling. It's not like I go out in the street and say, "Hey, man, what's happening?" like I did in Manhattan, because the people, and this is something to do with my lecture, the people here are 60% or 70% immigrants. And so when Donald Trump started coming out with his rap about immigrants, it's totally, absolutely bizarre. These people are the most harmless people you ever want to meet. I go to the mall to relax, right? We have a big mall. They have malls. You know what malls are, right?
Yeah.
They're not open now, so it's unfortunate. Right near Macy's, right? So I would go there and sit and just relax away from this intense work on the not on the camera, but the newsletters. And these people were just harmless. They come from all parts of the world. I'll bet you 50% are undocumented. And I'll tell you this, don't tell anyone, nobody in New York City cares if people are documented or not. You probably.
That is so true. That's what I miss about New York. I miss New York.
How long were you here?
I was only there for like a couple months, but I would come in and out basically because I got sent onto a project in Baltimore and then DC, when I was coming from Los Angeles. But I miss New York. I used to live like 15 minutes from Queens. I was more in like Bellarose area, more like suburban area, but I miss it.
Yeah, well, there's people don't care about your ethnic background. I mean, it's because nobody owns anything. No part of the city, except maybe Harlem, belongs to anybody, so you can't say this is my territory, you can't come here. It's just everybody is intermixed. And so people, when I write on Facebook, I tell them about New York, they really don't get it.
That's so true. They really don't. So I read your newsletter and I signed up
on
for
my
it.
mailing list.
Yes, I'm on there.
Since when?
Um, when we first started talking on LinkedIn, so I went and signed up on it.
Uh-oh, I better be careful what I say, because that's very radical. I mean, those are my most radical. I'm trying to, what's the word? How can I best say it? To the academics. I'm trying to,
Mhm,
I'm not going to use the word. I'm really directing it toward the academics, and I'm saying you
mhm,
guys don't get it, okay? Like the whole idea that I wrote recently, the First World War as a psychotic episode. Historians do not think like that. They think if it happened, it must be real and meaningful. I'm not an amateur historian. I studied that. That was one of the first things I studied. There was
mhm,
nothing accomplished. 9 million people were killed. And the strategy was to ask men to get out of trenches and to run into machine gun fire. And, and nobody says, oh, this is totally self-destructive. They were
mhm.
trying to get their own men killed. Oh, they were trying to win, but they couldn't find an opening. So, so one of my one of my major projects in human existence is to get historians to wake up. I call it awakening from the nightmare of history, to look at history in a different way, not and to look at it as a sickness. That's why I've started writing. As you see, there's a lady called Bandy Lee. I don't know if you
I
saw her.
read one of her articles. Yeah, yeah.
She became very popular, right? And
Hmm.
she's getting from me because I write on Twitter and I always write on top of whatever she says. And I'm getting her to take things one step further. So her latest article was collective psychosis. And I'm trying to get people to look at certain episodes of history as insane. Not to say, oh, the Holocaust happened, oh, it was a bad thing. That it was basically insane. And this is connected to my lecture. How did I understand Donald Trump so well, so quickly? Apart from, of course, he didn't do what Hitler did. Again, people, oh, he's Hitler, blah, blah, blah. But the basic dynamic of isolating one particular group and blaming all of the society's problems on that group is exactly what Hitler did and is exactly what Donald Trump does. That's why it was so easy for me to analyze. If you substitute Mexicans for Jews, you can understand Donald Trump. The
Hmm.
immigration, that was his basic fantasy. It doesn't have to do with racism the way the liberals try to write. He don't make a big deal about black people. Here I can quote it, I'm sure you remember it. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending the best. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime. They're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. Now, this is so bizarre. I mean, the disparity between reality and fantasy. I've actually looked at some of the statistics, and they find that Mexicans and immigrants and illegal immigrants, and I have the data, but I'll say it, about 1/4 the proportion of the the white population. So it's a fantasy. So this is at the core of my research. Now, how many Jews do you think there were? There were 550,000 Jews in Germany in 1933, less than a half
Oh.
percent.
Hmm.
Total fantasy, the
Hmm.
danger of the Jews. If you ask people, oh, they were lawyers and businessmen, they were jealous, blah, blah, blah. Most of the
Hmm.
Jews they killed were peasants in Soviet Union. That's why people sometimes guess very large numbers because they know about 6 million Jews. And,
Hmm.
most of the Jews they killed were not Germans. They
Hmm.
killed Polish Jews, Soviet Jews, Romanian Jews, and Hungarian Jews. But I
Hmm.
studied it for 30 years and I can't find anything they did. It was Hitler's mentality. And it's exactly the same. I mean, do you really think that Mexicans have done anything to Americans?
I'm not going to interrupt much in this, but I mean, honestly, just gave me the chills. I never looked at it from that perspective.
I know. That's
Being
what I was thinking
a
too.
grandson of Holocaust survivors and relatives who didn't make it, understanding the history of what I know of the Holocaust and Hitler's blaming the Jews and the whole thing, and I heard what Trump said, and I never made that comparison. until Jude just pointed it out, and I've got the chills, and I'm horrified.
Of
Mhm.
course, he didn't do anything like what Hitler did. He don't have the
Mhm.
power. Hitler was the head of a whole country. He was a dictator. So he was able to enact or execute his plans. But if you know the word ideology, the word, it's a very important term in the academic world. His basic idea, I was amazed at how simple it was for me to put this together. His basic idea to isolate one group and blame that group on all the evils of the nation, it's identical. And it's identical in that there's no rationale. And that's where I talk about fantasy. The Jews were not dangerous to Hitler. I've looked into this over and over and over again to try to see where it was Hitler's psychology, which was much more complicated, by the way, than Trump's. But the same idea that one group is responsible for the loss of America's greatness. And it's quite complicated, the psychology. But yes, they are identical ideologies, which, thank heaven, Trump has not been able to enact because you don't have the power to do it.
Do you think that anyone in the future could have that sort of power again and kind of like reignite another world war?
I mean, not if I can help it. So my work is designed, I have a paper which you can look at online called Awakening from the Nightmare of History. So as I was going to say in my presentation, I am not an activist. I do not participate in politics at all. And I'm not a liberal, I'm not a conservative. I think it's kind of futile. These people go online, they're all telling what to do, what to do, what to do. And they can't do anything. Only the people who are in power can do something. So awakening from the nightmare of history means to become aware of these dynamics. I think Trump is unique. Some people say, oh, Germany was that way. There's another way of saying it. No Hitler, no Holocaust. No Trump, no movement, no Trumpism. How did he make America great again?
He gave
He did make America great again.
Yeah,
how?
He gave the House, the Senate, and the White House back to the Democrats. Pushed it far back to the left.
It's deeper than that. He aroused the American immune system. You remember how passive people used to be about politics, how they took take our democracy for granted. It's something eternal. Nothing can ever stop it. He made America great by being a scapegoat or by being somebody to make us realize that we could lose it. So Americans are going to become greater now because they're going to respect what they have and they're going to fight for it. So in some way he fulfilled his fantasy by somehow generating the hatred toward him to make America fight for the democracy, which they took for granted. One thing on multiculturalism and nationalism. So nationalism is still the most powerful political force in the world. You know, people identify with their countries, right? I am an American, I'm British, I'm French, I'm Russian, whatever. So if I can bring back my rock and roll, John Lennon, he said, I'm not going to sing. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living in peace. So this is the beginning of multiculturalism. My friend John Lennon, who lived 20 blocks from me.
Wait, you knew John Lennon?
The way everybody knows him, but I was very close to him psychologically, and he didn't live far from me. And when he got shot, it was such a trauma for me and people my age and most of New Yorkers, because he was starting out on a new path, right? He had given up rock and roll for a while, and then he's starting over, you know. So and it looked like he was going to integrate these identities of hippie, father, lover, pot smoker, that put it all together in one. And then when he got shot, that was kind of the end of the counterculture. But the statement he made this song is kind of the beginning of thinking more about multiculturalism. And that is a very dramatic thing in America, particularly among young people. For various reasons in my personal psychology, I got hip to it very early, for my age. Okay, I'm not in the younger generation. I met a Filipino girl, and I said, are you a movie actress? No, I'm taking care of Mr. So-and-so's house. So you meet these beautiful women from the Philippines, and they're not movie actresses. And I couldn't get a date with a movie actress. And the Chinese women have such endurance. They don't get divorced. No matter what a jerk I am, Maya doesn't think about divorcing me. They get married for life. So these other cultures, people are missing out, these poor old men who don't know about women, let's say, from other cultures. So the younger generation is going to be different if the older generation doesn't kill everything. But they will die soon. And then, as you know, the younger people have a different outlook on things, and they don't care really that much. I mean, you see a beautiful woman, you go, oh, you're not in my ethnic group, I'm not going to go. I don't get it. I don't see why a man would have anything against somebody from a different culture. Why? They have to be very narrow-minded, and they're not in Manhattan. They're in different parts of the country, right? That's why if you look at a map, you see where the coronavirus. Anyway, I don't want to get into coronavirus. I don't know much. But anyway, yes, I think multiculturalism is a very important dynamic, as I'm sure you know better than me. And it has to do with abandoning the idea that you have to identify with one country and have your whole social identity connected to one ethnic group.
Richard, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on our show tonight. We really enjoyed learning about your journey and everything that pretty much composes what you're doing.
You're very welcome, and I haven't had so much fun since. I'll leave that blank.
That's awesome. But thanks again. And guys, you know where to find Richard online.
Go to www.librarysocialscience.com. I think that's my main web page, and they can go. You can add it to newsletter, Library of Social Science newsletters, etc. I think if you go to librarysocialscience.com, you can find my essays, my books, and my newsletters. Well, a list of my newsletters.
Awesome. So guys, you know where to follow Richard and to learn more about Library of Social Sciences. And we will see you next time. And Richard, we'll see you next time as well.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Rock on.